There are many things the Kirby series is known for, be it the beginner-friendly difficulty, overall charming presentation, or hellish beasts beyond everything we know. It's hard to point a finger at one certain trait. Among these well-established features, it's also the spin-offs, which make up easily for half of the entries of the franchise. For every mainline game, there's at least one accompanying side game, which often simply explores one interesting idea or leaves behind such a following that make these games even more memorable than most main titles. The reason why these spin-offs work so great deserves a video on its own, but generally speaking, Kirby is by himself the perfect host for all sorts of gameplay scenarios, thanks to his flexible nature, ability to fit in basically every genre, and most important of all, having the most simple shape in the world. Especially the Nintendo Switch and 3DS proved this point by releasing all sorts of intriguing experiments, which often found their origin in one of the mainline titles. Going by how frequently the developers create them, it seems like they're a fitting way to earn money, stay fresh with a creative mind, and giving fans something while they wait for the next big thing. Sometimes it's even the other way around, as Kirby's Dream Buffet portrays more of a cherry on top of an amazing anniversary here. On paper, this whole approach appears to work perfectly fine, but something should turn out to be different. If you take a look at all these spin-offs released in the last 5 years, only one of them got the full retail treatment and was developed as a standalone title. Everything that should follow afterwards was relegated to be an eShop only title, with Super Clash even being free to play. The benefits of this kind of behavior towards spin-offs are quite obvious. There's no risk in developing a big costly experiment, as it might fail and cost the staff team a lot of resources as well as a budget at the same time. They have the creative freedom to try out ideas that would otherwise not justify a fully blown production, but at the same time I feel like something gets lost along this way of thinking, and that is the mindset of spin-offs being a smaller thing. As I mentioned, these side games are often regarded as appetizers for the main menu, that are the mainline titles, which can be applied to basically every franchise and not only Kirby. The main difference, however, between Kirby and other franchises is how ambitious some spin-offs tended to be in the past. Look at Kirby's Extra Epic Yarn, for example, which basically brought back the series on home consoles to great success despite being rather gimmicky and not what we would have imagined. The game even contains more content than some mainline titles, and going by how ambitious the overall adventure was, it might even be kinda insulting to call this entry a mere spin-off. Or take a look at Kirby Air Ride and the iconic reputation the game still carries. Back in the day, the reviews might have been more on the critical side, and the fundraiser certainly could improve on a lot of aspects, but there's a reason why modes like City Trial are nonetheless timeless to this day. eShop only titles have no chance to build their ideas like Air Ride or Epic Yarn did, because there's only so much a budget title for the eShop can do. Now, it feels like the only time the developers go for a home console spin-off game is when the stars align and the respective console bears some kind of gimmick that perfectly fits the required idea. Some fans might still be salty we never got a traditional platformer for the Wii U, but at the same time, there will probably never be a chance to carry on the idea of Canvas Curse and explore it on the Wii U with its natural, perfectly fitting second screen. This, however, brings us back to the Nintendo Switch, which is a rather basic console from its hardware architecture and isn't built like a Wii or Wii U. The console doesn't offer itself for weird shenanigans, which is why we got quality traditional platformers instead of another Rainbow Curse. This is not to say they follow a different plan, as the Kirby series probably enjoys the biggest success in history right now, but you also have to be aware why spin-off titles are now not fully realized games anymore, or let me say, only scratch the surface of what is possible. Jumping into the past, the very first spin-off we received was Kirby Pinball Land for the Game Boy. Going by its name, it was nothing more than a simple rendition of pinball with the Kirby skin, but it shouldn't take too long until the still freshly born franchise should become a series with all sorts of interesting titles. Looking at the release history in general, it becomes quickly apparent that most of these spin-offs are placed at handhelds, as they require much less budget as well as time to create and often fit the flexible nature of the consoles. Today, a Kirby Pinball Land would most likely be a eShop only title, so despite the fact there were some examples in the past, times have simply changed. Today, the threshold to justify a standalone retail release is much higher than back in the day. Naturally, there's always the possibility to simply offer a title for a budget price, as the recently released Metroid Prime Remaster proves the advantage of such a such a policy. This, however, is one of the rare exceptions of Nintendo not charging full price, and there's no reason to assume they will change their behavior towards Kirby. To put it in basic terms, spin-offs need to be fairly ambitious and stand toe-to-toe to mainline titles. Kirby Battle Royale kinda struck a balance in between and was probably the final test to see if something like this minigame collection would warrant its retail release. While I found the game quite entertaining, and despite the fact it was a 3DS game, hence not charging as much as a today's Switch game, many players, even Kirby fans, were not ready to buy an experimental title like this. The content was plainly not enough, and Battle Royale should therefore mark the age of upcoming eShop only releases. But what speaks against the idea of these kind of smaller releases? Like I mentioned, most of these games tend to be on the smaller scope, resembling something like a smart device game. Super Kirby Clash even follows a similar payment model, with being free to play and offering additional items for real money. It wasn't as bad as people often try to imply, since you can easily see the main bulk of Super Clash without paying a single penny, but it muds the reputation and holds back the potential. A boss fight focused Kirby game can lead to so much more, concerning how bosses are one of the most well created aspects of the series. On the contrary, a rather favorable exception is Kirby Fighters 2, a straight up follow up to one of the 3DS releases, but this time it's not free to play and actually quite ambitious. This fighting game included a story mode, multiple new abilities and fighters, and a couple of costumes to unlock. If you would still have the 3DS among us, you can clearly see a retail release for this title, since it nearly contains the same amount of content as something like Battle Royale. The gameplay is even deep enough to constantly play again, as it obviously is not as complex as a real fighting game, but utilizes a generous learning curve to increase your skill. So far, it's probably the only Switch eShop only Kirby, which enjoyed a fairly decent following, with people modding new features in small tournaments at its release. This leads us directly into Kirby's Dream Buffet, the most recent endeavor. While it is my favorite Switch spin-off title so far thanks to being completely original and quite creative as well as fresh, its appeal dropped extremely quick. From my experience, just after a week, it was very hard to find people online, and the basic premise as well as the lack of any substantial modes made it yet another quickly forgotten Kirby spin-off. Part of the reason why this is the case with this and many other titles is the annoying online mode. It's no secret that every Kirby game so far offered a lackluster online mode in performance and options. While it was excusable in Battle Royale due to being the first title in the series to implement this feature, now it becomes a little embarrassing to constantly run into a connection error or serious lag. On top of that, in games like Fighters 2, there are no modes or options to choose from, and it feels like the online mode is barely included just so they can claim to have one. On the contrary, have a look at the already mentioned Kirby Air Ride, a GameCube title with no online functionalities whatsoever. Not only is the racing game 20 years old, but it is still one of the most beloved spin-offs thanks to its fleshed out and simply addicting city trial mode. On top of that, it was created in only a couple of months. Granted, according to Masahiro Sakurai himself, they could reuse many assets, making the final development easier, but it's still a testament to how Kirby spin-offs were approached back in the day. At the end of the day, I do not want to portray this topic as a serious problem. On paper, the way how they handle the franchise might be the most logic treatment regarding the size of the team, and sometimes it makes simply no sense to stretch a simple concept to something it does not need to be. The only reason we received most of these spin-offs is the simple fact that many of them were basically already created in the original titles, and even though I haven't mentioned it, Blowout Blast was the perfect example of a title to experiment with 3D. The solution to this discussion would be outsourcing Kirby titles to other teams. Kirby and the Amazing Mirror as well as Kirby Rat Attack were both not created by the main Kirby team, despite the fact they are regarded as mainline games. Now that Kirby as a series is more successful than ever before, it's much more likely for the development team to either increase their manpower or outsource concepts, maybe even take higher risks for a mainline entry. Kirby consists of one of the most well done spin-off titles of all Nintendo franchises, and it would be a shame if we never get something like Air Ride, Epic Yarn or Mass Attack ever again. But what do you think about this topic? Which side game would you like to see again, and do you think the way how they approach them today is more favorable? Let me know in the comments below.